Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of ARG Presents. I'm Amigo Aaron, joined as always by my identical twin brother of another mother, John Boat of Car Schaller.
Howdy, howdy.
What's a good word, Boat?
I'm ready to talk about some Atari 2600 video games.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, if you'll recall, in last week's episode, we spun the retro roulette wheel, and it has tasked us this week to play games from the Atari 2600 platform. So, a little bit about the Atari. It is considered the granddaddy of all modern consoles. It was released by Atari in 1977 in the US and in 78 over in Europe. And it was the brainchild of Nolan Bushnell and the Atari Corporation, and has sort of became the ipso facto icon of video games. Its iconic joystick with the little orange button and the wood grain. You still see it everywhere, don't you, Bo?
You do. It's a console that has stood the test of time. It doesn't matter who you are, if you are of a certain age, or even if you're younger than a certain age, like me, then you'll still you can still recognize an Atari 2600.
Absolutely. Just a little tidbit on this thing. I was nosing around. This came out in '77 at an introductory price of $199 US. Today's money, $803.
Holy cow.
So
you were loaded if you could afford an Atari 2600 at launch.
the funny thing is, eventually everyone owned one in all the US. Even we owned one. So it's crazy. They sold, it's hard to get total numbers, but they sold around 30 million as of 2004. Of course, this console stopped being produced. Gosh, I guess they went through variations: the Atari 2600, the Atari Junior, and then if you count stuff like the Atari 7800, which played these games, who knows how many millions of these things are circulating right now. But millions and millions, and they're still going strong, most of them. They're pretty reliable.
And I'll tell you this, you may not know this about me.
All right.
But the Atari 2600 was the very first video game console thing that I ever played.
Really?
My neighbors down the street, my best friend growing up, her name was Amber. Her parents had a 2600, and I still remember playing Pac-Man and Defender. They were the very first two video games I ever played.
That is, and it's ironic because Pac-Man is the all-time biggest seller on the 2600, 7 million units.
That's unbelievable.
7 million horrible units. Because that game was roundly hated by most Atari followers. So, with that in mind, and the fact that this thing had well over 400 cartridges, our job was to pick a couple out and talk about them. Bo, what do you got this week?
I chose Dragster.
As timely as today's headlines.
That's right.
So, Cosmic Arc is a game that was produced by an outfit called Imagic. They had an interesting mythology in the way they did games. If you know anything about the history of Atari, in the early days, Atari treated its developers rather shabbily. They didn't give them credits on their game covers. They did not give them credits in the game. They looked at these guys as just basically hourly workers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't even think that they paid any kind of royalty or anything like that.
You got zilch. And so a bunch of these developers, or really they were just independent programmers because you basically developed your own game. They said, well, enough of this, and so a bunch of them left to form Activision, right? Which, ironically, that's what the game you picked is, an Activision game. So another group that left went on to create Imagic, right? So these were two different companies, and you got to remember at the time, this was a novel concept of an independent third party producing games for someone else's system, which is effectively what it was. And of course, Atari took everyone to court, but eventually, it was allowed. And so people could produce games written for the Atari 2600. So Cosmic Arc, again, came out in 1982. It was a game for 1 to 2 players. And it came out after a previous game that Imagic had made called Atlantis. And there's a tie-in between Atlantis and Cosmic Arc, which I'll get to. So the premise of this game is kind of interesting. You are an alien race, and you are looking for creatures to effectively keep your line going, your species going. You need to. It's sort of like a cosmic ark. You're like Noah. You're going around trying to pick up creatures to put on your ark. Mm-hmm. and restock your supply. So this game's really in two parts. In the first part of the game, you are basically a large UFO. You descend from the top of the screen, and you are in the middle, and you have asteroids coming at you, up, down, left, right. And your job is to shoot these asteroids before they hit your ship and damage it. The controls in this are kind of neat. You have just the joystick, no button, and if you want to shoot upwards at the asteroid coming from above, you hit up. If you want to shoot downwards, you hit down, left for left, right for right. Pretty simple. So whichever way you point the joystick, you'll shoot a shot that way. So that in itself, it's funny, I've thought about this quite a bit. If in the old days, that would almost constitute an Atari 600 game, just that one part. But in Magic, they took it a step further in a lot of their games, and this is no exception. So this game actually is one of the few Atari 600 games that had a second stage or a second screen in it. In the second screen, your giant UFO from the asteroid field descends down and basically orbits a planet. And out of the bottom of the ship, a little tiny UFO comes out. And the UFO comes down to near the ground level, and there are two creatures, and these creatures will vary depending on what planet you're on. Your job is to go down with your little tractor beam, kind of hover over them, and then sort of beam them up, basically, effectively. Beaming up, and this isn't like Star Trek. It's more like a tractor beam. It takes a while to suck those little suckers up. It's almost like an intergalactic claw machine is what it reminds me of. So on the first level, this is not too bad. You go down, these little critters run around. You try to kind of get them in a corner. You beam them up, and then you fly back into your ship. Now, there is a time element to this. If you take too long, you'll hear an alarm going off. And when that happens, that means you need to get your hiney back up into the mothership because an asteroid's getting ready to fly out from one side of the screen or another. If you get back to your ship in time, you can use the up, down, left to shoot the asteroid that's coming in, not down, but up and left and right. If you don't make it, the asteroid just comes in and blows you up. If you're not in the ship and you can't even use your guns, you're boned. It just blows you up. So that's something you always have to be in the back of your head when you're playing this, because there's a time element that you have to worry about. It's not too bad in the early stages. Now, as this game progresses, and it's one of these games that just never ends, it just goes on forever. The asteroid section gets a lot harder. The asteroids will start coming in at a faster clip, and eventually you'll get these kind of wiggly asteroids that come in, and sometimes they'll wiggle to the point where your shot misses them, and so you have to be very quick and careful to get those because they're ultra dangerous. So that screen will get harder, and then as you progress to that second screen, they add an element of danger, which are these two like zap towers that are on either side of the screen, and between them a wave of electricity will shoot out occasionally, and they oscillate up and down, and if you get caught in that, it kills you, blows up your ship. You have to restart that level over and try to get those little guys off the planet. Another problem is if you only get one of the two guys, that's fine. You can still leave the planet, but guess what? After the next asteroid belt, you're coming back down to do that planet again. So it can get rather irritating. This game doesn't have lives. It's got basically like a life bar at the bottom there. That's really what it is a fuel meter. And if you get hit by asteroids, you lose a certain amount of fuel. And if you, every time you shoot, you use a little bit of fuel. Every time you shoot an asteroid, you get some fuel back. So the fuel element, basically the points are the fuel element in this. And when you eventually run out of fuel, your ship dies. If you're just traveling along and get hit by enough asteroids, it'll kill you real quick. You can get killed pretty much anywhere and lose fuel. So fuel is the main thing. It makes the game kind of odd because you can't really say, okay, I've got 2 lives left, I've got 1 life. You've got to not be hit, and you've got to know how much fuel you've got. So aside from that, it's a pretty simple game, but it's not the easiest game to master. I've played it for years, and I don't think I've improved after a spell. One of the neat elements of this game, though, is that when you die at the very end of the game, your ship is destroyed, and a little tiny ship flies off from your ship. It's an element I always enjoyed, and because it's a callback to a previous Magic game called Atlantis. Now in Atlantis, you're defending Atlantis from an aerial assault, right? And It's the city of Atlantis. I'm not going to get too much into it, but basically it's sort of missile commandy, I'd say, wouldn't you? And at the end of that, when Atlantis is totally destroyed, you see a little tiny ship zoom off, and presumably that little tiny ship is the Cosmic Ark. So this is sort of a sequel to Cosmic Ark, and presumably to Atlantis, and sometime in the future, presumably, they were going to do a sequel to this, which unfortunately never got made. So somewhere that little ship's still flying around, waiting for the deal to go down. There are 2 versions of this game. There's one of the versions allows you to turn the starfield on and off. The starfield in this thing is sort of an interesting happenstance, basically. So the developer of this, the guy that actually did the programming in this game, was a guy named Rob Fulop. All right. So I found an interesting interview with this guy. He was also behind Demon Attack. He did a bunch of stuff. He did Missile Command on Atari. So he had a pedigree that was pretty good. He said that the starfield in this thing was an accident that he discovered when he was making Missile Command. It was just he zigged when he should have zagged on the programming, and he made this starfield. And apparently the starfield was sort of this was sort of a holy grail in the Atari from a programmer's perspective. It was difficult to perform. And he said, there's a great story that Rob talks about where he was at an electronics show with the guys from Activision, and they had Demon Attack out and were showing it. And they were real proud of Demon Attack, and it's another great game. And they kept waiting for the guys from Activision to stroll by, and they never did. David Crane and the gang. So finally they strolled over there. Well, lo and behold, they're standing there all proud. They're displaying Pitfall. All right. And Rob Fulop was like, son of a gun, and basically they were showered in glory because Pitfall, an all-time classic. Right. So the next year they had this out, and the whole purpose of it is, according to Rob, was for vengeance. He knew that it would kill Crane to see this starfield that he could not figure out how to do. And sure enough, according to him anyway, the next year, the guys from Activision strolled by innocently 2 or 3 times before finally David Crane walked up and congratulated him on the starfield. So he did have a bit of vengeance right there. So I thought that was a kind of a neat tale. But
what an exciting time to be! I'd love to be a fly on the wall during one of those early conferences, where those games were being demoed for the first time.
Yes, can you imagine? It'd be incredible. So in a nutshell, that's the long and short of it. It's a fun game. The iMagic games always had awesome, box art. The boxes were often chrome, really fancy with pictures. And the pictures on these, and I saw a little behind the scenes on a couple of these, they would actually take physical pictures of models.
Yeah, the photograph models.
And so these models are, presumably, there's some of them are still around even. And I think this is one, I'm pretty sure this is one of the ones I saw featured. This model of I guess a starship beaming something up, but I always thought they just looked classy. And Magic stuff, a lot like Activision, it had a certain finesse and prowess of the programmers that made it stand out. So I thought it was a pretty good game. Have you given this one much play this week? What did you think of it?
I thought this was a good game. It's certainly more in-depth than many Atari 2600 games, which, like you said, either one of these little events could be a full game in itself. You have the up in space, shooting the asteroids, and then you have down on the planet beaming things up. It kind of reminded me of the Death Star battle. Atari, I don't know if that came, I'm sure it came to the 2600. I always played it on the Atari 8-bit, but it's that sort of multi-stage thing.
Yes. I remember, it's funny you should mention, because I remember thinking, I was like, I know of, and I don't know which came first, to be honest with you, but this concept of using the joystick to shoot up, down, left, right, it was in another game, and it's been on the tip of my brain. I could not remember what it was.
Robotron.
No. I mean, this literally. I mean, this is the exact game. I don't mean no moving, just using the joystick up, down, left, right. It was an Atari 2600 game. I don't know if this was first or it was first.
But the main, I like the graphics. I thought the graphics were great. Actually, I love the Starfield. It looks super, super cool.
Very colorful, too,
I love the way that they differentiate between the planets just by shifting the color scheme. It's a little thing, but I mean, they could have just as easily not done it. I don't like the fact that you can't see the score all the time. To me, that just seemed weird.
That is strong. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a limitation.
I have a feeling that it is because you're using a different graphics mode to display the score, I think.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things that I thought was cool about this game is it actually sort of had like a little title screen when you power it on for the first time. It says, copyright 1982 iMagic. It wasn't just a still thing, like you got with a lot of early 2600
It's
games.
funny things you take for granted. Now it's just like you expect something like that, but you're right. Not something you saw every day on a console. Something else I read a blurb about, and it's just showed up in an interview or something. I never read anything else about it, but apparently they had planned, I don't know if they ever successfully did this, but Magic had planned a contest for people to name the little creatures.
Oh.
Which I thought would have been kind of cool. I don't know if they ever successfully did it or not, but that'd be kind of neat to let people name them. Really, they're different. They're just little squiggles, or sometimes they have 4 legs and they're running around. But for the Atari to make little creatures that look like little creatures,
it was a huge achievement. One of my biggest complaint about this game is the way that the difficulty works. I got tired, physically worn out from just playing the game before the game got too hard for me to play. I had to,
really?
I don't know what your top score was, but I got to about 7,000, which amounted to about 10 minutes of playing for me.
You did better than me. My score was 4830.
And I didn't really I felt like I could keep going, but my hand just hurt so much that I was like, well, I'm going to just play this on a higher difficulty level. I wish that the difficulty level would ramp up a little bit more and make you not have to choose between the difficulty settings on the title screen.
I will say, I've never played 2 players of this, but I looked into it, and it's the way they handle it is kind of wacky. That one person plays this version level, and one person plays the other level, and you can also turn off the other level with another difficulty switch, or just one of the other games, it takes out the alien abduction level entirely, and just goes with the shooting area. You're right. One thing about this game, I will say this: I didn't get super tired, but there's a when you're on that meteor level, and that really is sort of the meat of the game, I guess. I mean, this part's cool too, but that's the real challenging part. It's got the way it makes noise when you shoot something, and it's a rhythm, and it intensifies in pitch as you go. And so you can sort of tell when you're coming close to being through the meteor storm, but it also intensifies your trepidation, it ramps up the anguish, because it's like, oh my God, I got to get through it. And it's nothing worse than letting that last asteroid careen into your ship and blow it up, and it's the last one, you're sure of it. Now, who knows for sure? But it made me stressful and nervous, and so I would say I do. I'm just gripping that thing really hard and trying to get through it. So I could see where it basically tire you out. Of course, you're better than me, so I never had enough chance to get that tired on this game.
And again, I was playing this on an emulator. I was using a PS4 stick, so I wasn't even using a stick. I was hitting the directions on the D-pad, and I don't know if that, if I would have been less fatigued, if I would have been using the trusty gym stick, or or your Wicco stick or whatever.
You'd been putting more bite marks in it, that's for sure.
That's true. But on the whole, this is definitely one of my favorite 2600 games, and I had never played it before picking it this week. So
really?
I was very impressed.
Very cool. Well, I like it an awful lot. Now, as with a lot of Atari 2600 titles, and probably both these this week, I had to look on eBay to see what this is going for. I mean, I think I've got 2 or 3 copies of this loose at the house. I remember using one to make a fridge magnet out of. And so, I mean, these things are plentiful. This was a good seller, and they're everywhere. And a lot of Atari games are dirt cheap. This is one you'll find at a swap meet or in a milk crate, one of those deals, and you can get it for $1 or 50 cents.
Right.
On eBay, I saw them going for a couple bucks, and I saw box ones going for like $5 plus shipping. So, I mean, they're not at all rare. No. Not at all. So if you want to get in on the Cosmic ARG, man, it's a cheap feed.
Or just 2600 collecting in general. This is the time to get in.
It is, because I will say I've noticed that as I go to some of these shows, the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision are sort of the forgotten consoles in a lot of ways. It's funny, the ColecoVision actually picked up a lot of steam in terms of those old sort of second generation consoles. But for whatever reason, the Atari, maybe it's because it's more rudimentary in a lot of ways, or there's so many, there's a lot of duds for it, let's face facts. But there's a lot of good stuff in there too. So if you're a real cheap collector like me, I've got a crate of Atari games, so so I understand all about getting the cheap ones.
Yeah.
But this would not be the worst game to pick up. It's a good title. I would say it's amongst the best iMagic titles, and one of the better titles on the 2600. So there you go, Cosmic Arc.
All right.
You want to take over the helm?
Sure. So my game for this week is Dragster. Now, before we go any further, I did not, when we recorded the last episode, it was actually a couple weeks ago, the news about the score and Todd Rogers, none of that stuff had broken. All of this has happened since we chose this game.
It's unbelievable.
Which
really.
I can only infer that they, OmniGamer and that whole crowd, they wanted to wait until ARG Presents talked about Dragster.
That's what it was, man.
To really blow the doors off the high score controversy.
I think you got it, man.
So we're going to get into all that stuff towards the end, but first I thought we should talk a little bit about what this game is.
Yes, please.
Okay. So Dragster was released in 1980 for the 2600 by Activision. Activision, as Aaron talked about, is a company of developers that left Atari due to Atari just basically treating them like maintenance men. They produced a widget. They were totally interchangeable. They weren't artists. The folks at Activision got tired of being treated that way and formed their own company. This was the first title published by Activision.
Really?
This was the very first title that they brought out. It was developed by David Crane, who we've also heard about. He did Pitfall, of course, Little Computer People, and did you know that he was the developer of Night Trap?
David Crane?
Yeah.
No.
I had no idea, but there you go. That infamous Sega CD release, Night Trap, they garnered all that controversy in the early 90s.
It's funny you should mention that. I'll tell you why. I didn't mention this when I was doing their review on this, but the fellow that programmed it, Cosmic Arc, Rob, I believe he also worked on Night Trap.
Maybe they were a team.
He did. Sega Genesis CD. And he was so embarrassed by this, by working on it after all the controversy. He said that he was, the next game he did would be the cutest, fluffiest game ever made.
Now, you might think that Dragster is an original concept in video games, but you'd be wrong.
Really?
This is actually a clone. This is a clone of an arcade machine called Drag Race that was released in 1977 by Key Games.
Key Games, which that was Atari's
right, that was
sub-company.
A subsidiary of Atari. Now, do you know why that subsidiary existed?
I believe it was to compete with Atari.
It was to fulfill exclusivity agreements with these arcades that say, if you put Atari games in our arcade, well, you can't put them anywhere else. So they said, okay, we'll just make this other company and produce the same games. But there was never an Atari version of Drag Race. It was only in Key Games. It was called Key Games because it was founded by Joe Keenan, who was a friend of Nolan Bushnell, and they had one game called Tank that was so popular they were actually producing Atari and Key Games versions of Tank. I thought that we just pause right here and talk about, in our minds, sometimes I think we think about Pong and then we skip to Space Invaders. Pong was around 72, Space Invaders 77, something like that, 76. But there were a ton of games that were released between these 2 years in arcades, and they're largely forgotten. Mostly, I think, because they're black and white games, and they're just not as much fun to look at. But there were, Key Games and Atari released a lot of racing titles, sports titles, that X's and O's football is part of that, a basketball game, and of course Tank.
One of those.
Yeah. And so, I just thought it was neat that Drag Race is part of that forgotten legacy of arcade machines.
It reminds me that, in that era, too, you had some of your video / mechanical hybrid games in there, and you've got some of those sub-hunting games that you never see anymore.
A lot of weird stuff, and those are all high-dollar machines.
Yeah, and a lot of those racing games, they have all the, like 2 or 4 wheels on them. They got
Sprint 8,
later.
So, this was not ported to any other machine. This was a Atari 2600 exclusive. And the object of the game is to basically shift gears and accelerate. So as soon as there's a timer that runs down, And you have a side view of your car as well as a second car. If you play a 2-player game, then the second car is controlled by the second player. If you play a 1-player game, that car is still there.
Yes, and it's horrible.
Yeah, and he will not accelerate. The way the game works is you shift from neutral into first gear all the way up the gears through fourth gear, and you try and see how fast you can get to the finish line. It's a very simple game, but as I'm sure you figured out, it's very, very addictive. There is an alternative game to this. One of the other game that's featured in this cartridge adds an extra layer of difficulty where you actually have to steer the dragster between the sideline and sort of a barrier or a bleacher. And so I never did that.
I tried it and I was not good.
To me, I was so focused in on getting my speed, getting my time up on the main Dragster game. I was having enough fun as it was. But anyway, there's kind of the animation in this game is very limited. Your Dragster itself, the wheels have, I think, 2 frames of animation, and then there's also a frame of animation when you blow your engine. It looks like your entire vehicle explodes, which I'm not sure if that's how it works in real life. I'm not a big Dragster guy,
the
but
whole cockpit just sort of falls
seems
down.
like there should be a high mortality rate among Dragster drivers.
No kidding.
But yeah, and basically when the game when you reach the finish line, the game freezes, and that is the end of the game. So you could ask yourself, well, is this game a good game? It's a tough thing to answer. To me, it's a great game. I started playing this when about 10 years ago. I bought a game for the PS2 called Activision Classics.
Mm-hmm.
And they've released a ton of these. All kinds of companies have released. This is the best one I've ever played, and I'll tell you why. One, it was all Activision games, so it was all good. There was no crap. Two, it had some unreleased titles in there, which were pretty awesome. There was one called Beam Rider that was super cool. I can't remember if that was unreleased or not, but there were some unreleased titles in there. Three, they licensed a bunch of 80s music to play in the background. And so you could listen, you could listen to Kaja Juju and all that stuff, and you could control the volume of the game and the volume of the music. And of course, this is, back before you had streaming services and everything like that. So I didn't have all that music. So it was cool that they put that stuff in. And then 4, of course, when you could earn the patches. And the patches were a thing of beauty. And we'll talk, I guess we could talk about how the patches work. So Activision, this goes into a little bit about what we'll talk about with Todd Rogers a little later, but they would put in their cartridges, in the instruction manuals sometimes, they would put what score you needed or what time you needed to earn a patch. And if you took a picture of that score and sent it in, they would send you a cloth patch. And these things look super awesome. I would love to have a whole set of them. It would have been a cool thing to look up how much those are going for on eBay right now, but I did not do that.
So. I didn't either. I'm sure they go for a pretty penny these days.
Yeah. So anyway, that's pretty much the long and short of it. Aside from the other game where you steer the Dragster, this is it. Now, would I have been happy if I'd have paid full price for this? I don't know. The games, this costs as much as Pitfall or River Raid. Does this deliver as much long-term fun? Well, on the face of it, no, because it's so simple. But I think the 2-player option, I would probably add a lot of life to this because you go up against, other people. And this is a game that's so easy to figure out that even people that aren't really into video games, but maybe are into cars, they could enjoy it too. It is neat to watch your engine or your Dragster as it accelerates. If you hit it just right, it'll go up on 2 wheels. So I like that a lot. I do own this cartridge. I've got a box copy of Dragster for the 2600. The price tag on the back has been scratched off, so I don't know how much this originally went for. But I can tell you that I bought all of the Activision games. Almost all of them can be had boxed for about $10 on eBay. So these are not high dollar games. And of course, this is a classic with the rainbow on the front. And it's just a classic box. So I really like the box and the art design in this game a lot. Aaron, what did you think about Dragster?
When you picked this, I had heard of it, and I had even had it in the Atari. But I had zero idea what in God's name you were supposed to do. So I tried it, I could do nothing. I literally just sat there like an idiot. I was like, what do I do? I have no idea. I don't know how to drive a stick, for that matter, in real life. So
Me neither.
I got online. God bless God bless YouTube, I should say, eBlay. God bless YouTube, because you could get instructed on any sort of. I could probably perform open heart surgery if I had that computer in there. And a dude said, listen, here's the simple and basic ways that this works. And I watched the video, and I grabbed the joystick, and and after fooling with it for about 10 minutes, I had a rudimentary knowledge of what the hell was happening. And then I got it. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like maths. I mean, it just clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat there, and you can attest this because I started sending pictures out. I played this thing for every waking moment that I could for 3 or 4 days, and then on and off after that for another week. I played the crap out of it. It is the most basic game I think I've ever played and derived so much pleasure from. It is ugly. It's green. It's frustrating, and you can only get mad at yourself.
Right.
But it is a lot of fun. It's fun in the same way that, like, I'm trying to think what you could equate to. I mean, it's just a quick shot glass of fun, but you want more shots.
Yeah.
So I equate it to a drinking problem, I guess. The fact that you can, when you get remedially good at it, you feel great. You're like, I mean, every time I would go down, and this is one of those games where you drop, say, like, if you drop a tenth of a second, you're like, holy smokes!
It's a huge deal.
And I remember when I first started getting under 7, I thought, man, I am a stud at this game. You know, I've really gotten it down. And then, ironically, and I'll let you get into it, but that's when I thought, let me look. I wonder what the world record is on this, because I remember hearing something about it, and it was the exact same moment that it went down.
Well, it's funny because let me refer to the instruction book here. In the instruction book, it even has these tips on how to be a world-class driver. And there's a picture of David Crane
that
right
book
there.
Right there shows you the difference between Atari and Activision. They give the guy a picture, his autographs on it, and a blurb.
Right. And so, and he says that in a one-on-one game, if you want to beat the other player, you'll have to become an expert drag racer. You'll want to come in under 6.5 seconds. And then he says, if you can do better than 6 seconds, take a picture of the screen and send it to us. We'll enroll you in our world-class Dragster club. So I think that's what you'd have to do to get the patch.
That's what you had to do. And unfortunately, I'll reveal it now, I would not get the patch. I was close. I don't know what your time was, but I'm going to ask you now before you get into the Todd Rogers stuff. My time was 6.44 seconds.
All right.
That's as fast as I could go. And I tried a lot, so that's as good as I could do.
You beat me, man.
6.44.
You beat me. 6.47.
Yes.
Congratulations.
And I've got pictures to prove it.
Are you sure? Was it a tool-assisted speed run?
No. The only tool was me.
You did assist in it.
Now, I've got to hear about this. So tell us about what you found out with the whole controversy.
Okay, so I'm going to try and make this as brief as possible.
Sure, but we've got to touch this.
There is literally a hundreds and hundreds page thread at the Twin Galaxy forums that details all of everything that's gone on. But basically what happened was in 2000, well, actually, back at some point in the past, Todd Rogers was this guy. He submitted a score to Activision. It's a little bit unclear about whether the score in question was witnessed in person or if it was a photograph and it had been lost. But at any rate, Activision had accepted his time. And the time was 5.51 seconds.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in 2001, the score was put into the Twin Galaxy score database. So it's been there for a while.
I think it was the longest reigning score that they had.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure.
The score was eventually recognized by Guinness Book of World Records. Made it into the book and all that stuff. However, On August 11th, 2017, Twin Galaxies member D.B. Cooper, what a name, officially disputed the validity of Todd Rogers' Dragster score. He said that it was impossible, and he demonstrated that it was impossible by basically playing a perfect game using code, using an emulator and what he knew of the code. This was also done in collaboration with this guy named OmniGamer. So they said that there's no way that it's possible to get a score of less than 5.57 seconds. And this has been tested several times by several different people. What happened as a result of this is that Guinness has removed Todd Rogers from its archive, and the Twin Galaxies has removed not only this score, but many scores from their database by Todd Rogers, because they've seen a pattern where Todd has he's submitted scores for games that just physically aren't possible. For example, there's a game called Wabbit for the 2600.
I've never heard of it until
Me
I read
neither.
about this, yeah.
There's a kill screen that activates when the score reaches 1300. But he actually submitted a score of 1698. So people are wondering how that happened. He's also got a score of 99,999,990 on the legendary axe for TurboGrafx 16, but the score only increases in multiples of 50. So I guess it's impossible to get that score. So because of this, Todd has kind of become shunned by the high score community in general. However, he does have his defenders, including among his defenders is one Mr. David Crane. David Crane said, I had personal interaction with Todd Rogers around the time of his Dragster record. Todd was without question one of the greatest video game players in history. We at Activision were so impressed with his skill that on several occasions we flew him out and paid his expenses to demonstrate games at trade shows. After hours, we would entertain industry reps, etc. Todd was there. He was putting up awesome scores. So this guy is not a man without skill. Whether he has forged these scores or not is sort of immaterial to the fact that he's very talented at playing video games. However, it's sort of, to me, in this, the burden of proof lays on Activision, because Activision is the one that accepted this score. So I don't know if perhaps, there was something that with a picture where it's something that got smudged or something like that, but I don't lay all the blame for this particular score, for the Dragster score, at the feet of Todd Rogers, because Activision saw something that proved to them in the days before Photoshop and emulators and things like that convinced him that this was a legitimate score.
It's very tricky. There are layers. This is like an onion. We could talk about it for an hour. There are people that think he has forged scores for other attempts at Dragster. From what I read, the theoretical highest score that you could possibly get was 5.54. And no human has gotten anything, or no computer, no one has ever gotten anything below 5.57, and a bunch of people have gotten that. Mm-hmm. So probably that's as low as it will go. Do I think he probably faked it? Yeah. Do I think he's a great player? I mean, he was Mr. Activision. That was his moniker. So he's much like Billy Mitchell, who just had a very similar thing happen to him with his Donkey Kong scores. These are tremendous players that have played live for years. Did they take some shortcuts? Almost certainly. And this is a new era. It's not like the old days where you just send something to a magazine, you can get away with it. I mean, you've got people out there who will haunt you night and day, and they will look up everything. I look at the Coleco Chameleon controversy. Those guys were looking at still photos, and they were determining the circuit board that was inside the clear plastic casing, and they had determined the chips that were on it and stuff. The people do not screw around. Right,
and that kind of brings me to the next point of this and sort of the dark side of all this. Whether Todd has done this honestly or by deceit. I read his response on Facebook. He posted a very
saw it
lengthy
as well.
response, and he says, "If you wish to call me a cheat, a fraud, etc., you have every right until you see evidence that says otherwise. But when remarks become personal and my friends and family are dragged into the mire, it is no longer about gaming." And that is really the dark side of almost everything that has to do with the gaming subculture, is that you have all these, they're really kids. Even if they're grown up, they're acting like kids. And they send hateful messages to people that have nothing to do with it, that are related, friends or whatever, talking trash about this guy. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about a high score for a game that came out 40 years ago.
Well, some people take this stuff very seriously. You should never take something so seriously that you threaten someone's family.
Right.
But this is where we're at now.
Yeah.
The anonymity of the internet gives. I mean, there's always been trolls as far back when I was on the BBSs, and they've gotten worse over the years. That's just the way it is. I guess the moral of the story is, stay fair, play fair, and you probably won't have to go through something like this.
Hopefully. Speaking of which, though, did you happen to hear about the most recent Billy Mitchell controversy?
I know. I heard about his Donkey Kong meme issues. Right. Talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And so several of his scores have been disputed because, and this is just so crazy because he claims that he's taking the live feed off an arcade board. And what these people have done is they've actually slowed the footage down to such a degree that they can see the order that things are drawn on screen.
Yep.
And when you play through MAME, things are drawn differently on the screen than they are on a off an arcade board. And they're saying that this is not what he says it was.
Yeah, and again, much like Rogers, Billy is a top shelf player who has performed time and time again in public over and over, years and years. Now, did he take a shortcut? Almost, and he probably did. I mean, the evidence is damning. So again, much like we said with Todd Rogers, play clean and fair because we're in a new era. Now, of course, back when he submitted this stuff, you didn't worry about someone going through it with a fine-tooth comb, but those days are over.
Yeah.
People will pick apart anything.
And it's funny, since the King of Kong has come out, and people still think about Steve Wiebe and Billy Mitchell being at the top. Do you know where those guys are now in the Donkey Kong world records?
I believe Mitchell scores was it number 10 now?
He's
or
12.
Like 12?
Yeah.
And I know Wiebe's not in the top 8 anymore.
So they have been long surpassed as the kings of that particular machine.
I mean, that's a great flick, by the way.
It is.
I mean, it's a work of sort of semi-fiction, but as a film, it was,
very entertaining.
Billy Mitchell was the top heel.
Yeah.
Just he came out with his hair and the tie, and he strutted out with his busty wife. It's like, look at this guy, And here's this poor pathetic teacher.
But that's
Great
the thing.
movie.
It's like we were talking about on our other show on Amigos. Video games. It's great when we have characters like that in the scene.
Yeah, and so I will say it hurt me, much like when a sports star falls that I like. It's tough to watch someone that you. I'm not saying I respect or admire him, but I enjoyed his antics. And really, Billy's raised a lot of money for charity.
Yeah. By all accounts, when you talk to him on a personal level, he's a nice man.
In fact, I used to listen to a show that had Wiebe and Billy on there. It was the first time they'd ever gotten on any shows, well before King of Kong. He was super nice. They were getting along great. I mean, that drama was basically conjured up. And it's sad. It's sad that he's, smudged up his reputation now. But I mean, it's smudged. There's no coming back from that.
Yeah.
So.
But anyway, that's just a little bit of the Dragster controversy. Again, we couldn't not talk about it. If you are interested in finding out more, definitely head on over to Twin Galaxies. This whole event has sort of changed the way that I think a lot more high scores are going to be disputed from now on, especially those from long ago.
And I'll give him credit for trying to clean it up.
Yeah.
I will say that. And if you take anything from this, just go and play some Dragster.
Yeah.
It really is. It's as much fun as 6.9 seconds can allow. It's a great fun game for what it is.
All right, Aaron. Well, I thought before we go to the wheel, since this is our second episode, we've kind of dipped our toe in the waters here. We should explain a little bit more about what ARG Presents really is about. This is a show that is a lighthearted take on two games from a different system every week. If you're tuning in, expecting to hear two goofs talk about two games that they like to play, you're in the right spot. If you're in this for an in-depth, no holds barred, no stone left unturned, strategy heavy podcast from guys that grew up playing these games and play them constantly day after day, this is probably not the show for you. Aaron and I are, we love playing video games. We love talking about video games. We love our community, the Amigos Retro Gaming community. And we want to get the word out about games that we enjoy. But we're not really looking to take any kind of a deep dive, because that's not really the kind of podcast that we like to listen to. We want to make the kind of show that we'd want to listen to.
And often on this show, we'll be trying games, much like on Amigos, that we've never played or haven't played for decades. I mean, we don't even... This is one show where we could literally say, we don't know what we're doing. We don't have no idea what we're playing next week, because we can't. And so that's sort of the fun for us. And we're going to use this as a personal platform to just jump in the genres and systems that we haven't played with that much, and to give it a shot. Try some different stuff. And it's exciting for me to try games I haven't, like Dragster is a perfect example of a game I probably would not have picked up if it wasn't for having it come up on the wheel. So if you like that sort of thing, here we are. And if you want something really deep, I don't know.
There's other shows out there for you.
Yeah.
But anyway, all that said, Aaron, it is time to bring out the Retro Roulette.
Bring it out, Boat.
All right. So
there's a certain mythology you have to go through before the wheel appears.
So we bring out the wheel. Now, last week, of course, we had, as I attempt to do this, looking at the camera, the Atari 2600 was chosen. So we are going to remove that from the wheel, and we will add in a new category. This week's special new category is Arcade Classics. So
basically the purpose of this is he positions that. You can tell each one of these little quadrants has a different classic console or classic computer. We spin the wheel, and once the wheel makes the selection, we pick a couple games from that system to talk about on the next show. That's simple as that.
Here we go.
Round and round she goes. And hopefully we'll get a good result this week. What do we got, Boat? And it's
the Commodore 64.
Oh, wow. Hey, Commodore. I don't know much about them.
Well, we're gonna have to do some research, I guess. But if you are interested in hearing about another Commodore system, Aaron and I have a show called Amigos that runs weekly. Also, we actually tape it on Fridays right after ARG presents. If you want to watch it live, hang out in the chat, you're always welcome to do that. Amigos releases on Fridays. ARG Presents comes out on Wednesdays. It's all Amiga all the time, and this is whatever the wheel says it is.
So why don't you grab the envelopes here? Let's see what we're playing next week.
All right. So
in these envelopes, we have each picked 3 games, and we're going to pick one each, and that's what we're going to be doing next week.
At first, I thought you alphabetized them, but you did not.
Clearly, you confused me with a teacher. All right, so we've got the thing here. Let me see here. That looks like that's yours, and that is mine. So, Bo, what will be your selection for next week's C64 Spectacular?
Okay, we're going to play a game called Skate or Die.
Skate or Die. Well, ironically, that was also on my list, but not the one I'm picking. We're going to play Forbidden Forest.
Ooh.
I've heard a lot about it. I've never played it. So, Forbidden Forest and Skate or Die next week. Should be a good time.
Sounds great, Aaron.
For myself and Boat, have a safe, happy week. And until then,
adios. Aaron and John making a new podcast.